Welcome to InFocus with Ejaz Haider. This program is supported by the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research. CESPR is an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. And this program is part of that effort. Now, unless someone is living under a rock, the dumpster fire at the Oval Office is by now known to everyone. It was ugly reality TV, which the US President Donald Trump, by his own admission, allowed to go on. Since then, events have paced fast. Europe feels like a surfer that's been hit by the lip of a large wave and knocked off the board. Ukraine is in an impossible situation with the US having stopped the military goodies in the pipeline and, worse, intelligence sharing. The idea is to get Zelensky back and in a state of desperation. At least that's what the US strategy appears to be. At the State of the Union address, Trump mentioned that Zelensky has written him a letter. In an ex-post on 4th March, Zelensky reiterated Ukraine's commitment to peace and ending the war. He also laid down the broader postulates of such a peace in that post. Problem is, Trump's strategy appears to be to restore US-Russia relations. In that scheme of things, Ukraine is a problem and Zelensky is a nuisance. Now, Politico has already reported that some officials from the Trump administration are in secret contact with opposition leaders in Ukraine, notably former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko and former President Petro Poroshenko. We shall discuss that too, but the point is that Trump would ideally like to see Zelensky gone. In that, he's like, irony of ironies, Vladimir Putin, who has long wanted to see Zelensky's back. Meanwhile, Europe is trying to figure out what to do. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has presented the outline of a 800 billion euro rearm Europe plan, which envisages loosening national debt rules, EU loans for joint defense projects, redirection of EU budget to defense, mobilization of private capital for defense, and boosting lending from European Investment Bank. There's also talk of an EU army. How far can such plans work out is, of course, another topic. But to discuss where the situation stands and what's in store for Ukraine in the coming days, weeks, and months, I have with me Dr. Polina Sinovets. She is the founder and head of the Odessa Center for Nonproliferation at Odessa Missionek National University in Ukraine. Her extensive research which spans the nuclear weapons policies of the United States and Russia, nuclear deterrence, strategic stability, and European security has been published in reputable journals such as the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, Slavic Journal of Military Studies, and War on the Rocks. She is also the editor of Ukraine's Nuclear History and Non-Proliferation Perspective, and the author of more than 100 research publications in Ukraine, France, and the United States. With her is Dr. Mariana Budjeryn, a friend of this program. She is a senior research associate at Managing the Atom Project within Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, and the author of Inheriting the Bomb, The Collapse of the USSR and the Nuclear Disarmament of Ukraine, which was published by Johns Hopkins University Press in 2023. And it's a great book. I've read it. We actually did a program on this. And this book also won the 2024 William E. Colby Military Writers Award. And I believe Mariana is the only woman scholar to have got this award so far. Formerly, she held appointments as an MTS Stanton Nuclear Security Fellow and a visiting professor at Tufts University and the Peace Research Institute at Frankfurt. So welcome to the program. Let me begin with Polina here. Polina, as I said, unless anyone is living under a rock, everyone knows what the bust-up was at the Oval Office. I just want to immediately get your take on what you think it means for Ukraine, especially because there has been this follow-up of stoppage of military aid in the pipeline and also the stoppage of intelligence sharing, which was crucial for Ukrainian military in terms of targeting, especially deep strikes into Russia and also on the front line. So, and of course, as I said in my opening, Zelensky has written a letter. We don't know the contents of that letter as yet. But what are the immediate repercussions of what has happened and how the situation is unfolding? And then I'll take this to Mariana also.
Thank you. Nice to be here today with you. Though the reason is absolutely not nice.
I agree.
That that the stop of the support of US, especially sharing military intelligence information, targeting for actually missile defenses, air missile defenses working. This is a disaster at some point of view. Of course, it's not a okay. I mean, we can mildly say it's a like relative disaster because Europe is still standing on our side, and probably the repercussions of Trump's step would not be visible at the battlefield during the nearest months or two, because we still have something which was supplied to Ukraine, and also we still have the support of European allies, which are not going to give up, and probably will try to accelerate the support for Ukraine. But already the fact of stopping sharing the intelligence shows that the U.S. administration is very determined to ban Ukraine's will.
A quick follow-up, Polina. So, when I said in my opening that the U.S. strategy, well, I shouldn't say the U.S. strategy, or say the Trump administration's strategy, appears to be to get President Zelensky back and in a state of greater desperation. Is that something that you would agree with?
I would say probably the situation which is developing now, I would more of a qualify it that Trump wants to get rid of Zelensky as a president of Ukraine, because the fact that he has stopped sharing the intelligence will result in the bigger targeting Russia's success against the civil population of Ukraine. And probably the aim of Trump is to undermine the popularity of Zelensky. I mean, I can't say that Zelensky is absolutely popular, but with the more human victims in the civilian population, probably this is the step to show that Zelensky is no one if he's standing against Trump. And I am afraid that Trump is not, the main aim is not only to bring Zelensky to the table talks. It's not only to humiliate Zelensky, but to dismiss Zelensky as a president and to change him with somebody else who will be more complying with the US demands and also with the Russian demands as well. So it's actually playing for Russia.
Yeah, I agree with you. But here's the thing. One, of course, this amounts to, as I mentioned in my introduction, the Political report, with reference to some of the Trump administration officials being in secret contact with the opposition. But there was a poll, I just pulled up this poll while you were speaking. This was conducted by the British pollster Survation. And this was a week after the blow-up at the White House. And 44% said that they would back Zelensky for the presidency. And his nearest rival, who's trailing him by more than 20 percentage points, is Valery Zeluzhny. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Who's the former army commander who's now Ukraine's ambassador to Britain. And then Poroshenko, is, according to this poll, has got 10%. And Timoshenko has garnered just about 5.7% support. So I believe that that bust up is actually, in domestic terms, is actually redounded to President Zelensky's advantage. But here's the thing. Let me take this to Mariana. So Mariana, it's very clear. There are two tracks. As I said in my, correct me if you think that I'm off the mark here, but my own sense is that the bigger political strategic track here for Trump is to reinstate relations with Russia. The Russo-Ukraine war is a nuisance, and so is Zelensky. And then, irony of ironies, I mean, I'm not sure if Trump had any idea about the Ukrainian minerals until President Zelensky said, okay, you want to have a deal? Let's have a deal. And then that became the sort of second track, which is why, I mean, the Americans met with the Russians. I mean, the Europeans were not there, the Ukrainians were not there. So that's a separate track. And so I believe that even if nothing happens, in theory, if nothing happens in terms of a peace deal, Trump will go on developing relations with Russia while Russia continues to inch forward along the front lines. Is that something that you would agree with?
First of all, let's make it clear for all of us that we actually know little of what's happening behind the closed doors. I, for instance, can't claim to fully understand Trump's motivations, what's going on in his head, and much less what's going on in Putin's head, even though now we've seen, we had several years of his performance in the world, as it were. So we can make some conclusions as to his war aims, Trump's war aims, which remain subjugating in some shape or form, subjugating the whole of Ukraine, right? He doesn't need the extra 100 kilometers, of destroyed territory. He wants to keep Ukraine as a kind of vassal state in its neighborhood. And it does look like, the two great powers, the two nuclear powers, Putin's Russia and Trump's America today are conspiring to make that happen, right? What are Donald Trump's goals other than to get some kind of like a big deal that he can boast about, that he brought peace to this terrible war where he says millions have died and all of that? And not to diminish, it is a terrible war and many people have died and are dying every day. But he wants to achieve it quickly and he wants to claim success. And in the meantime, clearly, as you say, he seems to have broached this broader based rapprochement with Russia. And it seems that he, kind of maybe respects President Putin. Maybe he looks up to his systems of governing, which is kind of a very top down authoritarian. And maybe he wants to have that kind of not have restraint in the way he wields his presidential power internally as well. And Ukraine is caught in the middle, clearly. But let me just warn, and as Polina said, the situation is really bad, but everyone has consistently underestimated Ukraine as an entity that has agency in all of this. Ukraine's fate is very
Mariana, I'm going to come to that. That's a very important point, and I definitely we're going to discuss that. But I wanted to interject in terms of, see, the thing is, if Trump were to be an honest broker, as he says, and you're right, everyone knows this is a terrible war. It has taken a huge toll on civilian life, on infrastructure, on soldiers. But if he were an honest broker, you start with the basic premise. Who has aggressed against whom? You start with that, right? And you say, since he appears to believe that he's friends with President Putin, he could have picked up the phone and told Putin, listen, we need to work out a deal. And that deal will be between you, the US, EU, and Ukraine, right? These parties will be at the table. You will be the main parties, Ukraine and Russia. We will be there in a supporting role for Ukraine. That would have, to me, where I stand, that would have made more sense. Instead, what he has done is that he has approached Russia directly at the Oval Office, but even before the Oval Office, he has been making statements which appear to suggest that the problem lay in Kyiv, starting with the Maidan Revolution, that Kyiv is the culprit here. It has forced the Kremlin's hand into attacking Ukraine. And that completely upends the entire, not just the entire narrative, but also the facts of the case.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's a paradigm shift in the way, we thought, we thought U.S. was approaching this war. Even whatever the limits of its assistance might have not been, at least we thought we shared some basic facts, right, about what kind of war it is, and who is the aggressor and who is to carry the responsibility for it. Instead, Mr. Trump's approach is to completely blame everything on the victim, essentially, and strike some kind of a deal at the expense of the weaker party. So here, it's the might makes right kind of situation, and it is something that Europe, at the very least, is trying to mitigate to the best of its abilities. But I think what we are realizing is just how far dependence on U.S. military might has been allowed to take root even in the European
for the past 80 years, Mariana. We'll come to that also. And that actually requires a full-fledged program in and of itself. But Polina, Mariana mentioned this. And obviously I'll ask her to further dwell on it, but I want to bring you in with this thought that if you look at the battlefield, what's been happening in the past 3 years, the initial assessment was that the side with state-of-the-art weapons and platforms will be the side that will win it. But what we have seen instead, and I say this as a student of operational strategy, what we've seen instead is that the state-of-the-art tanks or APCs or even aircraft, the fighter aircraft, have not really made a lot of difference. Instead, what has made a difference are these drones. And I'm not even talking about very sophisticated drones. I'm talking about, drones that have been kind of retrofitted, first-person view drones that have been doing most of the killing. Russia is, of course, also, as it traditionally does, historically does, after its initial reverses, it's gone back to its original doctrine of having artillery as the centerpiece of the combined arms, and they've used their artillery very, very effectively. But the problem that I see is, and as Mariana mentioned, the Ukrainian army right now, and I'm counting out the Russian army, within Europe, the Ukrainian army is the most battle-tested army right now. It has learned, it innovates, but here's the issue. You don't have the manpower. That's a huge problem. And Putin also has issues, but you can't get 10,000 from North Korea or anywhere else, or 20,000. And your system is different, so you can't just keep putting meat into the grinder. And I think that is where the problem lies. It's not so much, I mean, there have been reports of desertions and so on and so forth, battle fatigue, mission creep, and so on and so forth. How is Ukraine going to address that?
I don't think that it will be the most urgent problem during the nearest months. The most urgent problem will be that the army, which is, I would not call it a small army because it's 1 million people. This is the biggest army in Europe now. It will have a lack of, battle, something to wage the battle, the artillery, the everything you need every day to wage the war. So now it's not about the people, just about the tools of war fighting. Yes, of course, our army is smaller than Russia, but we are smaller than Russia maybe 10 times or more. And Russia is the biggest country in the world, of course. It has initially bigger amount of people, and the more we are throwing people in the war, the more will be killed, right? And we know that Ukraine is not using soldiers as a puppets going down into the battleground as Russia does, because Russia is actually waging war with the human waves and sending tens of thousands.
You're losing. Listen, you're losing men, and yes, numbers in terms of reservists and all of that, but the more trained soldiers and officers, replacing them is not easy, and the ones that you get into the army and basic training and all that, and then push them to the front line, they do not have the skill set. It takes time to innovate. It takes time to learn. It takes time to get acquainted with the terrain and the rest of it. And as I said, the Russians are also innovating, and they're using their artillery very effectively. Whereas Ukraine has a problem with the armament. I mean, even if you have the guns, you don't really have the number of shells that are expended per day is just mind-boggling. That is what positional attritional war is. And in attritional war, quantity acquires its own quality. So, which is why I'm saying, and you're right, I mean, we're not talking about the rest of March. We are maybe also not talking about April or maybe even May. But as it grinds on, there is a problem.
There is a problem.
Yeah, there's a problem. I mean, we're in the war. I mean, I think we're all stating the obvious. Ukraine is clearly, in a very unequal battle. And even despite that, it was able to withstand for 3 years, something that nobody in the world would have said was possible, precisely for the reasons that you, Ejaz, bring about. It's incredible disparity in manpower, incredible disparity in resources. Now, Ukrainian leaders are not stupid. The Ukrainian military political leadership knows exactly what they have in terms of manpower and resources. That's why they were trying to mobilize to kind of correct this asymmetry with greater and better quality armaments, right? Ukrainians are in defensive positions, which are, ultimately require less resources, right? There's a ratio of defense to offense. If you can organize your defense effectively, then you actually essentially need less manpower, but you still need all of that ammunition to take out the human waves of the Russians are throwing onto the defensive lines, right? You're absolutely right. It's hard to regenerate the force after 3 years, where your best soldiers have been already killed. But, again, there are solutions to every problem. You can train, you can, if you have a secure places, you can train Ukrainian manpower with the assistance of the partners on the Ukrainian territory instead of busing them or, sending them somewhere to the UK. Just the time and the cost of doing it.
You're absolutely right. You see, experience has shown us, and analysts have now written about this, that training was much less effective than the lessons that the Ukrainian soldiers and officers were learning on the ground. And the whole idea of the combined arms offensive and maneuver warfare was something that was completely in opposition to what is happening on this front.
That's true. That yes and no, because even the basic training, you need experienced people to induct the new recruits. Who's going to do it? You don't have the manpower to spare, and in that case, you do even put basic training. You're mobilizing people, bringing them to the street. That was part of the Ukraine's problem with mobilization, because even the basic training wasn't organized effectively. You couldn't spare people who could train. And again, in that, you could certainly elicit the assistance of the partners if there were a will and, the kind of willingness to come and do that somewhere closer than trying to bus these brigades to, France somewhere or somewhere else. Now, that might be shifting and that might be changing because we see a greater, willingness of European powers to actually commit, whether it is peacekeeping troops or training troops or even Air Force. We've heard today a proposal of maybe deploying 120 European aircraft, the coalition of the willing, as it were, to patrol a part of Ukrainian airspace to safeguard it from missile strikes. Now, if you have that, then the safeguarded territory suddenly becomes a place where you can do a lot more, even in terms of military production, in terms of joint arms projects, as the Danes have done, and now the Swedes are doing, right? So,
but that also means, let's be very clear about this, that also means there's not going to be any peace, because Putin is not going to, whether under the NATO umbrella or outside the NATO umbrella, as an EU umbrella, and not even EU umbrella, because UK is not part of EU. So you've got another problem there, which is why, as we do this program, the meeting that's happening in Brussels, the emergency meeting, the United Kingdom is not there, because technically the United Kingdom is not part of the European Union. The issue is that Putin is not going to accept that. That is a bugbear for him. But here's the thing, and I want to come to the obviously the painful part of it. And I realize, I sympathize with the Ukrainians who fought so bravely. Polina, in theory, if a peace deal comes through, which essentially means that you're not going to get what you lost in 2014 and what you subsequently lost, would that be acceptable?
Well, if Ukraine will still be able to keep what is controlled, and if it will be a long, stable peace with the European peacemakers, let's call them like that, and Ukrainian territory to secure this peace, yes, it would be acceptable.
Okay. So, Mariana?
I don't think there will be an international recognition of the Russian annexation, right? I think that would have far greater consequences than just, Ukraine's partition. I think that would have consequences for, the whole post-World War II system, whether we think it's even there or not. But I think it would be, for many states, that would be a very bad precedent to actually recognize this annexation under international law. But I think some kind of, contested territory partition secured by a ceasefire of the kind that was obtained between East and West Germany, North and South Korea, could become rather long-term, and de facto could sort of continue for a very long time until some kind of grand geopolitical shift. But I think Ukrainians well realize that at this point they can get these territories back militarily. And as long as they're not recognized under international law as belonging to Russia, I think Ukraine would want to secure what it has with some kind of set of security commitments, right? To try and turn the territory that it does control into a prosperous country, not unlike West Germany, where the actual, let's remember who broke through the wall, on which side were the crowds. They weren't on the Western side. So possibly, with decades of building up, a country that one might want to aspire to be a part of, that they might win possibly this war and the allegiance of these territories that way.
So we are basically talking about an armistice, not really a peace deal. And I agree with you, in the sense that non-aggression, non-occupation, non-annexation. These are the foundational principles of international law, and accepting or recognizing occupation and annexation, which has been done through use of force and through aggression, military aggression, is obviously going to strike at the very roots of international law. But here's the thing, Paulina, with since Mariana gave the example of North Korea and South Korea and the demilitarized zone, the issue is that South Korea could go its own way, in the sense that it could be part of the US/Western, bloc, and because it had the security guarantees, which incidentally Trump is not prepared to give to Ukraine, at least not in the way that Ukraine wants it. So South Korea focused on its economic and social and technological development. It's become very rich and the rest of it. That said, right now, the South Koreans are thinking and having these conversations about whether they want to have nuclear weapons. How are they going to deal with North Korea? How are they going to deal with China? How are they, even though they are part of the alliance, how do they deal with an historical enemy and occupier, namely Japan? So my point is that even if an armistice happens, that's not going to come about by Putin agreeing for Ukraine, forget about NATO, even to be a part of the European Union. And he will keep fomenting trouble through the little green man, if you will, in whatever territory remains with Kyiv. So what does Ukraine get out of that? I mean, of course, cessation of immediate hostilities, yes, but what happens in the longer run?
You mean speaking about nuclear choice of Ukrainians?
No, I mean, speaking about security, speaking about, Mariana spoke about Ukraine's agency. I mean, the whole point is, what did the Ukrainians do? They said, we don't want to have a Russian-style system.
Yes.
We want to have a European Union-style system.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And Putin said, no, you are not going to have that. Because if you do that, maybe this bug is also caused by Belarus.
No.
So there are a number of issues here.
I think that this is what we are fighting for all these years, right? Not to have the Russian-style system, not to be a part of Russia. And and I don't think that Russia will win in this 100% situation, because for Russia, the most important thing was to make Ukraine a part of Russia or the puppet of Russia or something guided by Russia. I don't think it is possible. I mean, even if Russia will go on war fighting, because if Ukrainians would not agree with the deal, there would not be a stable peace. There won't be peace. There will be a consistent resilience.
But that's precisely my point. I mean, what makes you think Putin wants a peace deal? Putin doesn't want a peace deal.
I don't think Putin wants a peace deal, but also, I mean, there's limits to what he can do with Ukraine. In fact, his decision to go to war shows the failure of trying to influence Ukraine otherwise, from preventing it from going towards greater integration with the European Union. And, we talk about Ukraine as if you could institute, Trump can send some people to talk to Ukrainian opposition with the presumption of what? Of what? That somehow they can oust Zelensky by what? By sending a CIA mission to do, like, what are exactly the tools that they can think they can wield inside Ukraine? They can force Zelensky to, they can humiliate, but they can't do it with the entirety of the Ukrainian people. And even if they somehow, instead of they bring, say, Poroshenko, Timoshenko to, what that, do they think that somehow they would cooperate with Putin? I mean, Poroshenko is more nationalistic than Zelensky, for goodness sake. And Ukraine is not.
I agree with you. I'm sorry, I'm interjecting it. There appears to be a personal issue with Zelensky, right? Putin, of course, as you know, Putin hates Zelensky, and
so does Donald Trump. It seems so as well.
Yeah. But let me take you to one moment in that whole sort of that dumpster fire, as I call it, where Vance suddenly said to Zelensky, "Oh, you went to Pennsylvania in October and you campaigned for the opposition, namely Kamala Harris." Now, he was off because Zelensky did go to Pennsylvania in September, not in October, but he had gone there to a munitions factory which were making munitions for supply to Ukraine, and he thanked the management and the workers and the rest of it. My point is that Vance and Trump are doing two things. They want to have a deal with Putin, and they are also signaling to their MAGA crowd at home. And in that, Ukraine and Zelensky are a nuisance. That's how I look at it.
I agree with you. There's no way to win, right? So there's no way for Ukrainians who are trying to kind of minimize the worst that could happen in the dealings with Trump. I just don't think it's not a rational, it's not part of a strategy per se. It's a certain transaction, it's a certain set of attitudes, right? No matter what you do, you're going to end up in a bad situation. So I think Ukraine's best bet is to forge closer ties with Europe, with the people who are still, at least, in word and, evidently indeed, still committed to Ukraine's security. It's going to be really, really hard. But at the very least, that will initiate and start some processes inside Europe that Europe, frankly, should have started 3 years ago at the very least. If Putin wasn't enough to galvanize the European and
Mariana, I did a program on this.
Yeah.
I did a program on this after the Munich Security Conference. And, I said that I was surprised that Europe was so surprised by what was happening, because that was written on the wall. In the previous Trump tenure also, and then through the campaign trail, it was very obvious where he was coming from and how he was approaching this, right? But here's the thing, Polina. Europe, so far, says that it is standing behind Ukraine. After that fiasco at the Oval Office, when Zelensky went to 10 Downing, I mean, he was given a very warm welcome. He's been, even as we speak, he's in Brussels for that emergency meeting. He was there previously also. So the Europeans are standing behind Ukraine so far. My point is that, rhetoric aside, since Europe is not a collective now, or let me put it another way, since EU is not a collective now, you have Hungary there. There are a number of Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia. I mean, there are a number of countries that would be very happy that Ukraine has been thrown under the bus. They want to have their own relations with Russia. So how much do you think can Europe do? Let me also remind you that up until now, if we go back to the speech that Olaf Scholz made at the Bundestag, the Zeitenwende speech, nothing really came off that $100 billion of a 100 billion euro fund and all of that. So it's one thing to talk about things, it's quite another to actually implement them.
Well, I think that in this regard, Europe very urgently, with the emergence of Trump, Europe woke up. And the speech of yesterday's speech of President Macron is the very bright showcase that that Europe is listening, that Europe is taking lessons, and finally Europe started to move, because now it looks like this. Probably it would be wrong to accept EU, the European support for Ukraine as the EU will. EU is one of the actors, and sometimes EU cannot do everything, right? Because of that members which you talked about. But at the same time, there is a coalition of the willing, like France, UK, Netherlands, Denmark, Estonia, Poland, the ones who are very interested in supporting Ukraine. And as President Macron yesterday framed in his speech, actually we are all in danger because of that war, because Russia is the common enemy, and the fact that Putin is waging the war of Ukraine against Ukraine means that he would not stop after if he takes Ukraine. So now the most important element is that the leaders of Europe, first of all, Europe started to change, and I think it's quickly transformed in a very efficient, hopefully, there is a tendency of it transforming in a efficient, not only geopolitical, but also certain of a hard power actor. Of course, it will take some time, but it looks like things are moving very quickly, because even foreseeing that Trump will leave Europe like a couple of years before, there were a lot of ideas based on the optimism that something may go in a better way than we think. Now, nobody has any illusions. It looks like that support of everything Europe hates by the Trump administration accelerated the consolidation of Europe, and the understanding that Europe is now face to face with Russia, standing for Ukraine, because Russia is not a Ukrainian problem. This is a problem of Europe. And then if Russia would not be stopped there, Russia would never stop. And then the main task is to stop Russia altogether, because Ukraine is a gate to Europe, right? This is this winter wall, like in the Game of Thrones, which stands for the whole Europe against winter, which is going to come. And now everyone starts perceiving that winter is coming. Otherwise, we would not unite and stand for Ukraine.
And let me just say
I like the reference, and I wish you had also given the reference of the dead army, since we talked about Game of Thrones. But here's the thing. Mariana is an historian, so this whole phrase "coalition of the willing" is something that I am kind of wary of. The last time it was used, to the best of my knowledge, it was to attack Iraq. And that coalition of the willing had, great states like Marshall Islands and, a few others. But here, see, the thing is, 2027, who knows? We've seen the results of the French elections. And, Marine Le Pen is waiting in the wings. We've seen the kind of, for Alternative for Deutschland emerging as the second largest voting bloc. So a number of things are happening in terms of far-right ethno-nationalist movements in Europe, even in the countries which actually can bring together bigger and stronger militaries. So, which is why I'm a little skeptical about Europe's ability to sustain this over a period of time without the back-end support by the United States. And this is where, Mariana, I want to get your view on, since you very rightly said earlier in the program that we don't know a lot what's going on in the, behind closed doors, back channel, and all that. If we accept the fact that that Trump wants to get a better deal from Zelensky, and he's mentioned at the State of the Union address that Zelensky has written a letter. Apparently, there have been some phone calls also between the U.S. National Security Advisor and his Ukrainian counterpart. Do you believe there is a possibility that what has happened could be mended? And if it does get mended, that Ukraine will go along with the U.S. plan with reference to any peace arrangement?
So that's hard to know anything about the future, right? Because we've seen any and all of our expectations upstage. But let me just go back for 1 minute to the issue of Europe. You're very much correct in pointing out that Europe is not a unitary actor, that it has to muddle through and manage all these different sovereign countries, basically, that have an input. And yet, and still, Europe contributed pretty, as much as the United States to the support of Ukraine, if we actually look at the real number. Now, more of that aid was for economic support, not as much in terms of military support. So yes, but in terms of billions out of European states towards Ukraine, it's pretty much on a par of what the United States has contributed. And that
someone has to tell this to Trump. I mean, it's Trump.
Yeah,
Trump.
I think he doesn't want to hear. And that is despite Hungary. And that is in spite of Fico in Slovakia, right?
Yeah.
So it finds a way to do it. The problem with Europe is that everything it does takes time. And time is the luxury that nobody has right now. Europe does have even the military capacity, but it needs to be galvanized. It needs to be mobilized. And whatever the plan now for this European Defense Fund, 800 billion sounds like a ton of money. But if you stretch it over 10 years, and that still needs to be invested somewhere, it takes time.
That's the annual US defense budget. 800 billion euros, which is roughly 900 and some billion dollars, is the yearly US defense expenditure.
Right.
Also, Europe lacks a number of strategic capabilities like strategic airlift, like air-to-air refueling, like intelligence, ISR capabilities at the level that the United States has. And of course, the fact that the production capacities in terms of, the Western militaries for the past 25, 30 years have been fighting adversaries who did not have air forces, who did not have artillery, who did not have tanks and APCs. And it was quick, sharp, precise, shock and awe. Nobody had thought that in the 21st century, there's going to be something akin to World War I. That there's going to be a positional, not a maneuver war. And that it's going to be a meat grinder. And that you would require, the sides would be expending like anything from 4 to 5 to 10,000 artillery shells every day. The kind of industrial base you require, the kind of production lines you require for that is just unbelievable. But before I close the program, very quickly, are we agreed that on two things? One, that if there is a deal which allows Russia to retain what it has occupied, Kyiv would accept that. And B, that any such deal possibly and technically could not be a peace deal, but would be an armistice.
Yes. that it's going to be some kind of temporary situation where different parties are going to try and put in place what they think is possible, right? And Ukraine, to your previous question to me, I think Ukrainian government will try to play every possible angle to secure as much for its national interests and security as possible. So it's still looking to sign the minerals deal with the Trump, even if it takes, some humiliation of trying to come, apparently tail between Zelensky's legs and try to appease Trump to get that. They're going to try to do that. We see these efforts already with the letter, with the trying to repair relations. But at the same time, Ukraine will not forsake the European angle and the European route, and where it has some real and genuine support, not just transactional kind of support. So I think Ukraine will try to secure as much as possible while still focusing on its own military production. You mentioned drones. That has been put on, a large scale footing. That is going to, at the very least, be useful in monitoring the ceasefire along the front line. You can't have that many troops, right, to monitor. So some of these technologies are going to possibly morph into the ceasefire enforcing technologies potentially. And I think the lesson for Ukraine from all of this story, no matter how it ends, that it has to have a very robust defense production of its own. I think Ukraine is never going to allow to be found that dependent on the assistance of others that whose loyalty could be so fickle.
Polina?
Well, I totally agree with Mariana. Ukraine finally should start relying on itself, and those 30% of arms we're using is produced in Ukraine, which is already, and this sphere is growing. And with the European investment, it will grow even more. Still, yes, I believe it will be an armistice, and with, of course, with no legal codification of what Russia had invaded, because it's unacceptable, not even for us. For us, it's unacceptable, but it's not about us. It's about international law. And it's about the precedent, which will be critical for international system. And in the end, I would say that probably this war in Ukraine, this is kind of Third World War projected in the local scale, which will bring a significant change to the international system in the future, and which started this transition already now. We see the consequences, and it will be very significant for the shift of international system for the new world order. I don't know how it will look in the future, but it looks like shifts are kind of unacceptable. We won't have the international system we had it before the war.
It's a terrible dilemma, frankly, in the sense that if one looks at it from a moral legal perspective, obviously Russia has aggressed against Ukraine. At the same time, there's deep irony in the fact that one of the causes that Putin talks about has absolutely nothing to do with Ukraine. That was the US decision in the early 90s to start expanding NATO eastwards, and of course the Partnership for Peace program and the rest of it. And Ukraine has got caught, unfortunately, because of historical and geographical reasons. I call it the tyranny of geography, frankly. Got caught into that. And so, but at the same time, if you look at it realistically, looking at the situation on the ground, then obviously this war needs to come to an end. Although I believe, and I hope to God that I'm absolutely wrong, that an armistice might bring immediate reprieve, but it will also sow the seeds of further conflict. But before I leave, I want to say something provocative, a bit outlandish, but why not rattle the cage and see what comes out of it? Which is that you want to have a deal on rare earth metals or whatever they are called. The Chinese are very interested. Why not get the Chinese to come in? And Putin actually will be, if there is one country that can deter Putin, it's not so much the United States, but China. You would be securing yourself with a peacekeeping, Chinese peacekeeping forces, with a sprinkling of Indian and Pakistani United Nations peacekeeping forces. And you would be putting Putin on the back foot because he's already a junior partner of China. I'm just saying, thinking, as the Americans say, thinking outside the box. Quick comment, and then I close the program.
Well, I would, this is a very optimistic scenario, and I would be happy if Chinese peacemakers and Indian and Pakistani peacemakers would change the situation. However, there is also the worst case scenario when Putin would make a similar precious metals deal with the US and with China and everyone else, just taking more of the territory of Ukraine, because now we know that significant part of the territory Ukraine is making a deal on is under the control of Russia. So, which means that Putin may be also the part of that deal, and he may benefit from that deal. And then, Ukraine will have nothing. And then Trump may give a green light for Putin to invade more, just to deal with Putin, because he loves Putin. He loves to deal with him. And for him, Putin is the best partner. This is the worst case scenario, which also I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say that Ukrainians were careful to not destroy their relations with China, even throughout this war, even with the Chinese rather cautious, let's call it that way, position towards the invasion. And so the Ukrainian-Chinese relations diplomatic relations are quite robust. Ukrainians have been looking to maintain those in any shape or form they could. And, China had significant investments in Ukraine and in Ukrainian infrastructure before this war, investments that it's lost, right? Some of the port infrastructure and so forth. So I think Ukrainians would be keen to hone these at the very least, economic ties, and to see if, that together with the European Union, if they could maybe play that Chinese card, because of course China wants an in Europe.
Frankly, they don't have an option.
Yeah, China wants that European market. We see a trade war starting between the United States and China, and Europe has, significant economic leverage in that as well. So I think we could see some kind of realignment of Europe, Ukraine, China in this configuration.
If I was being a little naughty when I mentioned the Chinese and the Indian and Pakistani peacekeeping forces, because here it is, it's a trilateral adversarial relationship with China and Pakistan being strategic partners and India being in adversarial relations with both China and Pakistan. But why not? I mean, adversaries can come together and do some good. But thank you so much, Mariana and Polina. Mariana, as I said, is a friend of the program, but Polina has appeared for the first time, and I hope that the next appearance is under more propitious circumstances, if you will. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, do subscribe to the channel. These subscriptions don't get me any lucre, but they would help you get notification when a new episode drops. Until next time, take care and goodbye.